Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I feel completely humbled that I can share something. I'm not an expert on grief and lament, but I have some experience in grief and lament. So this is what I will offer you today. And before, I would like to start with, I don't know how to do that it comes on the screen, with an example. Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. She said, may your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. And I'm extremely encouraged to see how Hannah dared to come before the Lord, completely who she was, complete with her deepest emotions and fears, absolutely humble. With deep anguish, she was weeping bitterly. She saw her misery. And even before Eli, she was completely humble. She was not hiding how she was feeling, and deeply troubled, great anguish and grief. And that encourages me to kind of embrace the times of grief and lament, especially when I see how after coming out of that time of prayer, even if she hadn't received yet what she prayed for, her face was no longer downcast. That time of coming before God, expressing everything that was going on in her, already helped and changed her heart. And this is what I want to share with you, what I have experienced, what I've seen God has done to transform me when I choose to grieve and to lament. And I have three aspects that I have seen God has done. I'm sure there are more. This is what I have already learned. Maybe God is trying to teach me something else, but this is what I've seen. I think He's giving me a deeper understanding of myself when I grieve and lament. As I grew up, I was not used to connect it with my true feelings and emotion. In my family, dealing with emotions was like kind of waste of time, so we didn't really face them. But what I have learned is that God knows them anyway, and they are there. In Psalm 139, verse 4, it says, before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. So this encourages me because I kind of see God's invitation into a relationship with him. He's saying, I know already what is there. Just come, I will show it to you. And I really, when I talk to God, I talk loudly. I always pray loudly. And I really see how when words come out of my mouth, I realize of thoughts or emotions that maybe I even didn't know they were there. And God shows them to me. And then I don't know how it works. I can't explain. But in those moments, I really see how God is helping me to see those emotions, those feelings, as he looks at them. And then it changes, and it changes me as I need. Sometimes I need healing, sometimes I need forgiveness, sometimes I need comfort, or many other things. It's what he promises in Isaiah 61, 1-3, that he binds up the brokenhearted, he proclaims freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, and he comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve. And I really experience these things in those moments. The second things that I have realized that God does through grief and lament is that he refines my faith. Fear can prevent me from really embracing how I'm really feeling, what I'm really thinking. I often feel I'm afraid of being overwhelmed from what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. Or I'm afraid of feeling too much pain. I don't want. I want to leave it somewhere else. And I think you can relate with me. You have experienced times where you pray for things and they don't happen. Maybe you're experiencing now. I am experiencing at the moment something that I've been praying for many years, and it seems like it's not going to happen. It's not happening. And that's caused me a lot of pain and a lot of grieving. And I've gone through many emotions, and I'm still going in this period. I'm worried, I'm anxious, I feel sometimes deeply hurt by God because it seems he's not listening to me. I'm doubtful, I'm frustrated, I'm disoriented. And then I find sometimes also really afraid about my relationship with him. I'm like, God, what if my faith is not so strong and I don't stand the test? Or God, what if my love for you is not deep enough? And then if you don't do what I'm asking, I will not continue to love you. And there are really very real moments where then when I most of the time I walk in the park in Birmingham. It's many beautiful parks. And I walk and I'm in silence, and then I hear him through the Spirit. He comforts me, and he reassures me. And scriptures like John 10, 27, 30, where it says, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who has given them to me, is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one." And then I choose to believe it. I choose to believe that what Jesus says here is true for me. And then I feel the confidence. He will never let me go unless I choose, unless I say I'm going. He will always hold me into his hand. So I'm able to face my fears, and my faith increases and is refined. And I think I experience what Peter says in 1 Peter 1, 6-7. I'm not reading, but he refers to suffer grief so that our faith may be proved genuine. And I think that's what I see. My faith is proved genuine, and that's very encouraging. And the third part that I see God does in my heart is that he purifies my heart. In Psalm 139, he says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." And I don't want to have an offensive way towards God. I really don't want. But I think in times of grief, it is difficult to discern what is really going on. And I'm not aware if there is anything that is offending him. I can be so focused on how I'm feeling and poor me, and that I don't see if there is anything offending him. So, as I mentioned, I grew up in a family where there are not many there are a lot of emotions, but they are not addressed. I have many unresolved conflicts in my family, especially with my mom. I don't have a close relationship with her, and this is really a deep reason for me to grieve and to discuss with God about that. And now she's getting older and older, and she needs more help. But what I realize is that I am fighting in my heart to really love her and have compassion for her. And even just recently, I really realized that there is still a lot of resentment in me. And so I went out to talk to God, because I was not feeling okay. And then as I was talking to him, I saw all this resentment that is still there. And instead of having love and compassion for her, I was so focused on that. And I know that that didn't really please God. And I took the time, I asked God for forgiveness. I chose to forgive my mom again. I think forgiveness it's a process. And for all the hurt, the past hurts that I have. And I prayed for a heart that is full of compassion for her and love. And even now in this time, I do see how God has made room in my heart for having compassion and love instead of resentment. So my heart is filled with Christ-like emotions and not anymore, not all the time, but most of the time is filled with what pleases God. So that's what I've learned. I hope it has been an encouragement to you, and that you can embrace grief and lament as a way also to the path of spiritual formation. Thank you for listening.
Roberta is very humble. She says, I'm not an expert, but ever since I've met her, I've thought she is an expertly spiritual woman. And in many avenues of life that I admire, she is an expert. So disciple, mom, many things. And I also love that you chose Hannah, because out of all the women in the Bible, I also feel drawn back to Hannah over and over again, repeatedly, first of all, in wonder. How did she give up that child that she wanted so desperately? What happened? And also drawn back to her in delight, because intimacy with God, which is what she discovered, was the gift that she got that was so much more than she couldn't even imagine to ask for it. And God gave her the greater gift, and it's just delightful, right, that she got there. So I love Hannah. She did not know the full extent of what she was missing. She asked for a child, she got something even greater. She found the meaning of life. And I think, like Hannah, it's impossible to know what we don't know. We can ask God for wisdom, and I know he gives generously without finding fault, praise God. But it's such a delight when we find out what we didn't know, and God gives this incredible gift to us. And I'm sure there's so much more to come. But learning about grief and lament has been delightful. It's also been incredibly humbling. And, when we talk about grief, it's not just, as you've noticed with Roberta's sharing, it's not just about bereavement. Someone has died, and now I'm grieving. It's a hope that has gone unfulfilled, an expectation that's been unmet, a desire that's been unmet, that's significant for a long time. It's anything that's important to me that I yearn for to have been different or better or more, any of those things. I wanted to be married by now. I wanted to have children by now. I thought I'd be more healthy. I thought I'd be better off financially. I thought the church would be in better shape. I thought I'd still be in the ministry. I thought, right? I assumed, I'm 63 now, and I think most of my 4 decades as a Christian, I think that I was looking for something to connect to God's healing that was more like a switch, on or off, like, for example, in Psalm 64, it starts and he's kind of off, right? I'm not walking in the Spirit. Hear me, O God, as I voice my complaint, right? He's complaining, and we all know complaining is not a good thing, right? So he's off. Well, by the end, he's on, right? In the end, in 10 verses, let the righteous rejoice in the Lord and take refuge in him. All the upright in heart will glory in him. In 10 verses, or 11 if you're reading in Russian. How did he get there? And I think for most of my time, I thought, oh, he flipped a switch someplace. He just decided. He just repented, right? He just repented. And it all took place in one quiet time. But now I think maybe that journey took 10 years. We don't know. And perhaps if it's possible to train into our littlest children an on-off switch, right, for tantrums or inappropriate displays of emotion, right? Once we're all grown up and the basic programming is coded in, there is no more switch. Repentance, yes, is a decision in the mind. It's a mind change in a moment. But spiritual formation is a lifetime, involving heart and body and soul, and it's a path that first we must discover, and then we must intentionally choose to walk over and over and over and over again. I think sometimes, when I was approaching, I got ahead of myself here, sorry. When I was approaching the age of 60, I confess I expected to feel very differently than I did at 60. I had several very frustrated conversations with God about this, too. I expected to feel like an expert in my vocation by that time, in something, at least. Surely by this time, 60 years, I should have mastered something. Parenting, maybe, marriage, I don't know, something. Riding a bicycle, something. Instead, I felt and I feel like the brute beast in Proverbs 30. I do not have human understanding. I have not learned wisdom, nor, of course, have I attained to knowledge of the Holy One. In 2016, as we were leaving the UK for a brief stay in the USA, as was mentioned already today by Roger, Great Britain was contemplating leaving the European Union, and we had been living in the middle of Great Britain. It'll never happen, I said. And it did. Brexit happened. When we arrived in the USA that summer, it was an election year, and Trump was running for president. It'll never happen, I said. And it did. Yeah. When satellite photos were showing thousands of troops gathering on the Russian borders in Ukraine last February, and there was talk of invasion, I was sitting in Kiev, and I said, it'll never happen. If you had met me in my 40s and told me, you have unresolved pain and trauma associated with the death of your parents, and by the way, with a lot of other important relationships along the way, which is life-limiting to you, I would have said, no, I'm good, really. I trust God. I'm really good. I would have looked you straight in the eyes and said, no, I'm really good, thank you. I trust God. He's good. He's been with me. He's carried me. He's faithful. He doesn't test us beyond what we can bear. I get that hard things happen. He's been so good. He's shown me his goodness. I'm good. If you then had said, no, you really do have this, it affects your health. And actually, it affects all your current relationships. And if you don't go back and figure out what you missed and all the good things God wanted then and all this time that you've been avoiding this pain, if you don't go back and figure out all those great things, which you don't have any idea about, by the way, this will all continue to build and accumulate until one day you will hit that wall that I think Steve talked about in the beginning, that dark night of the soul. You'll hit it physically, you'll hit it emotionally, you'll hit it spiritually, and you will no longer be able to function. I would have said to you, it'll never happen. And you can probably guess what happened. So my early story was this. My strong, healthy father came home from work feeling ill one day when I was 10. I was raised an only child. He went to the doctor with my mom that day. From there, he checked into the hospital, and I did not see him for the next 2 years. When he finally came home from the hospital 2 years later, I assumed he was well. People come home from the hospital because they're well. He's well. Our ordeal was finally over. It was a horrible shock. to me to find out that he was about 40 pounds in weight, 3 stone maybe, came home to die. 12 years later, my mother similarly went to the doctor one day, not feeling well, came home with a terminal cancer diagnosis and was dead in 6 months. Later that year, I became a Christian. My story then and for the next 30 years was just as I told you. I trust God. I'm okay. God was there for me. I'm not bitter. I'm resolved. I cried. I sobbed. I'm good. If you had asked me, even just a few years ago, do you feel at peace with God, with everything surrounding everything that happened connected to the death of your parents and anything else in your childhood, I would have said, yeah, I'm absolutely at peace. I don't feel like there's anything unresolved. I've grieved their loss. God's in control, etc., etc., etc. So even though all those Bible verses, God works everything for the good, God doesn't test us beyond what we can bear. He's always there, right? I took those verses along with everything I had observed and been taught by well-meaning people all along the way about grief and how to deal with it. And I put them all together in such a way that I came up with another wrong answer. I had no clue. I thought I had nothing to gain by going back and digging up the past. Who can change the past? What's the point? Forget what's behind and stretch forward to what's ahead, right? So how has my theology evolved? What is the point in looking backward? We all know that reflection is part of spiritual formation, but isn't it counterproductive to go back and reflect? We're here now, right? We should live in the here and now. We should reflect on, as Dr. David taught in our first lesson, you spend time with God, you reflect on that, and then you go back and you spend time with God, and you reflect on that. Why should we go back into the past where nobody can change anything? Right? This is my thinking. In Psalm 77, this makes sense to reflect on, right? The deeds of the Lord, the magnificent deeds of God, the parting of the Red Sea. I'll remember your miracles of long ago. I'll reflect on that. That's good, right? And then the scripture I mentioned in Philippians 3, which I would always tell myself that, forget what's behind, strain toward what's ahead. But I took this completely out of context, of course. Paul was talking about his impressive pedigree, his Jewish credentials, forgetting all of that and straining towards Christ. He was not telling me, Tammy, don't go back and learn God's lessons from the pain in your life. That was not what he was saying. But I just, took a surface reading and said, forget what's behind. I'll strain toward what's ahead. Why? Because it's hard and it's scary and I had no answers. So that was a convenient interpretation for me, right? My bias and my filter was that in my early childhood programming was this: anything uncomfortable or unpleasant, my family does not talk about. Sex? Oh, that's uncomfortable. We don't ever talk about that. Therefore, my mother gave me not one word of preparation about the world to come. Oh, Dad's suddenly and inexplicably sick? Oh, that's very uncomfortable. We're certainly not going to talk about that. I served for over 30 years as a minister and a missionary, and part of my training for planting and building of new churches was, if you begin to have problems in the church, just focus on baptizing more people. And the problems will return to a manageable proportion. Now, that actually is true. They will return to a manageable proportion, but they get worse, too. They also get really bad. And that only works it's a short-term energy-relieving behavior, this, right? It does not solve the problem. So it was natural, maybe, right, that I was satisfied with kind of a surface reading of some of these scriptures, and they did not have the effect on my heart that I think God wanted until I hit my wall. And truly, I stopped being able to function normally in my 40s. I had always had a lot of colds, but here we go. Pneumonia put me in bed for 5 weeks. I had a 5-year-old. I had a teenager. I was supposed to go be in the Middle East for the whole summer. And I was flat on my back for 5 weeks. I learned from a good doctor that my adrenal glands were completely exhausted and depleted and not functioning. God had been trying my whole life to alert me to the fact that he and I had deeper things to talk about. My body was trying to communicate God's truth to me. In response, I did what I was faithfully taught to do all the way. I got a pain reliever and I kept going. I got on antibiotics and I kept going. My body, after all, is of this world, right? It doesn't want to go to heaven. So I need to beat my body and make it my slave so that I myself will not be disqualified for the prize, right? That's what we were taught. Here's another great example, another description of the wall or the dark night of the soul from Richard Rohr. Sooner or later, he writes, if you are on any classic spiritual schedule, some event, person, death, idea, or relationship will enter your life that you simply cannot deal with, using your present skill set, your acquired knowledge, or your strong willpower. Spiritually speaking, you must be, led to the edge of your own private resources. At that point, you will stumble over a necessary stumbling stone, as Isaiah calls it, or to state it in our language here, you will and you must lose at something. This is the only way that life, fate, God, grace, mystery, he's writing for a wide audience, right, can get you to change. Let go of your egocentric preoccupations and go on the further and larger journey. I wish I could say this was not true, but it is darn near absolute in the spiritual literature of the world. So I not only hit a wall in my health, I was depressed, I was completely exhausted, I felt like an absolute failure in everything that I did. I had no joy in the hundreds of things that I normally really like to do in life. I was completely stopped dead in my tracks 20 years ago. And so this is now my current attempt to describe what I'm about to share with you, the further and larger journey that God called me on, and which I have to continue to walk. And I believe he's calling all of us onto a similar journey. You may find it through a different tool or a different, inspiration, but I think the path to connect to God's healing is universal. It's a path. And we have to keep on walking it, keep doing this spiritual heavy lifting. I love Psalm 84. In the middle of this psalm, the psalm talks about at the beginning, it is just so, the best thing on earth is the presence of God. And it concludes with, the best thing on earth is the presence of God. I just want to be near God. And very in the middle, it says, blessed are those whose strength is in you, who have set their hearts on the journey. It's not, I'll be okay when I get there. If I can just get through this thing, I'll feel better on the other shore. God, just change all this stuff right here and I'll be better on where you are, where it's all shiny and wonderful. I get through this thing with my kids and I'll be good, right? I'll be okay. But he's in the mud in the middle of the journey. Blessed are those whose strength is in God, in the mud, in the middle of the journey. Walk in the path. So this is a path as I've understood it. It starts with discovery, and it is an ongoing process. I am so needing to still discover a lot about why, for example, though my mind embraces learning and constructive criticism and input and group learning and all of this, truly, deeply, I seek it, I want it, input, feedback, how am I doing, how am I coming across, how do you feel about our relationship? I intentionally ask those questions, but I don't know why, in my gut, to this day, I am scared to death when I ask those questions. I have a visceral, physical response in my gut. I don't know where that comes from. I'm working on it. I'm asking God to please show me this. It is very wise, though, to grow in self-awareness, right? Matthew 7, how can you say to your brother, take the speck out of your eye when you have a plank? The adulteress in Proverbs 5, she does not ponder the path of life. She doesn't know how she got here. Her ways are unstable, and she doesn't even know it. I must set my mind to be on a path of discovery. It is intentional. I have to take a step. It's not just going to overcome me. And it takes time. Ecclesiastes 3, I confess for most of my life, I never took time to mourn. Never. I avoided mourning. And many of the other valuable activities in Ecclesiastes 3, silence. as we've talked about at this, event. Silence is very important. So the first beginning of our path maybe is discovery. But what stops us from discovering? Fear. Fear about pain, about uncomfortable negative emotions. What's going to come up? Fear of not pleasing God. I've actually listened to a lesson by one of our people, a significant leader, a female leader recently, who said, I know that, it's accepted in many places to give God your raw emotions, but I just think it's not pleasing to God. And I've thought, my goodness, have we read the Psalms? But we can feel that way. This isn't right. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't talk to God this way. I should be further along. All these I shoulds, right? We're afraid of displeasing God in some kind of way. This was mine. I'm afraid if I really open up the past, there's no answers there. There are no answers there. So I don't want to go back and be in despair. There's no answers. There's no point. I think that was my greatest fear. But you know how God would answer this, I think? I hear people all the time say, I'm so afraid to even step on this path, I'm going to drown. I will drown in the swell of emotion. But God says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When we think about, what if I'm not pleasing to God? It struck me. I was having these thoughts, and I was reading through the Bible again, as I do every couple of years, the whole thing. And I happened to be at Cain and Abel. And I realized, if I had been writing the Bible, I would not have put Cain and Abel in the Bible. We don't talk about that stuff. What a failure. The very first humans. That's not encouraging. Let's not go there. I would have edited that out. That's not there. But God reminds us of all the bad stuff. He does not want us to forget the bad stuff. So different from my approach. One example, if you remember the whole thing that happened with Midian and the Baal of Peor, right? The Israelites started to follow the other god, Baal, in addition to God, and then they started indulging in sexual rights with the Midianites and all this in Deuteronomy 4. And actually, it took place in Numbers 25, but it was reminded in Deuteronomy, and this is what it says, okay? In Deuteronomy, only be careful for yourself and watch over your soul diligently, so that you do not forget the things which your eyes have seen, so that they do not depart from your heart all the days of your life. Now, that included the bad things, because he was specifically talking about this horrible event when Moses went to the Israelite leaders and said, each one of you go and kill your brothers. Anyone who has slept with a Midianite woman, kill them. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being there for that? What pain, what horror. Go make war in your own family and kill your own people? And they couldn't do it. Only Phineas, only one, had the guts to go in the middle of the whole thing. All the Israelites were standing there crying, weeping at the tent of meeting, saying, no, 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 please, 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 no, no, no. Phineas says, he went straight through and killed one Israelite who was in the act with a Midianite woman, and that we remember. Then God killed, I can't remember how many thousands, 24,000 in a plague. The Israelites themselves couldn't bring themselves to do it, but God killed 24,000 in a plague. And God reminds Israel of this here, and then in Joshua, and then in Hosea, and then in the Psalms. And we're talking about it today. He wants us to remember the hard things. There are lessons there for us. He doesn't want us to bury the pain. It's okay. We're actually created to live a full range of emotion, and it actually, the negative, we've learned as humans in our human societies that negative emotion is bad, we should run from it. But God doesn't do that. And as far as there's no answers there, when I say to myself, I'm not going to find you there, God, it's just dark and scary. There's emptiness there. There's just despair. God says, I am in the darkness. In Psalm 139, we can read, where can I go? Can I really go away from God's Spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I say, surely the darkness will overcome me, it will hide me, I'm going to lose myself there in the darkness, in the despair. The light is going to become night around me. Even the darkness, he says, will not be dark to me. And the night will shine like the day because God is there. But, that is what keeps us. Fear is the thing more than anything that keeps us from walking this path. But discovery is so important. It is really scary, and it takes courage. Then there's truth. It's funny, I think lament, I actually believe I learned the value of lament early on, like really being honest with God and talking to God honestly. But truth, as I just told you, right? There were a lot of things I thought were going to be true, but I was very wrong. And I was so deceived about the quality and condition of my heart. So when I come to lament to God just the way I am right now, without preparation, without meditation, without time invested, without walking this path a bit, my lament is pretty shallow because it's only what I'm aware of. I've got to allow God time to dig down and reveal to me the truth that he sees but that I missed, that I have denied myself, that I've run from for all these many years. So I suggest truth is a goal of our discovery, and it has to be a tool that we use too. Rejecting falsehood and turning away from the emotional lie that everything's okay. Spiritually, I know that's true. Everything is okay spiritually for all of us who are Christians. That's true. But emotionally, not so much, right? Truth, though, sets us free. Real truth sets us free. It's funny, our memories and our own narratives are faulty. Memory researchers have discovered that every time we take out a memory and we look at it in our mind, we corrupt it. Every time. Our memories are completely unreliable. They are not the truth that God sees. God's truth sets us free. I discovered this when I sat down with God finally to contemplate my relationship with my dad. What happened with my relationship with my dad? He was a great dad up until he fell ill. And then the last 2 years were horrible. They were horrible. They were traumatic. They were dark. They were awful. Our relationship was completely broken. I was furious with him. I felt betrayed. I was angry. I lashed out at him. He had nothing to say to me. And that was our last 2 years. And so for 40 years, that's the story that I told myself and everybody else, because that's the end, right? That was where I was living when the story ended. And no one had ever, until recently, suggested that maybe I ought to go back and take the time and review that whole story with God from the very beginning to the end. Well, why didn't I ever do that? Because I was upset about those last 2 years still. All the while saying, no, I'm good, it's okay, I trust God, it's fine, it's over, it's done, fine, good. Completely deceived. So what happened? In the first 15 minutes when I sat down, when I set my foot on that path and said, okay, God, I'll open myself up to this. What are you going to show me? In the first 15 minutes, you know what I learned? Oh my gosh, there was so much wonderfulness that I just forgot about because I'd been so stuck in those last 2 years for all that time. Truth is really, really important. That's one of the reasons we should go back and examine the past, because we cannot trust what we remember today. What really happened? Sometimes we live with those false narratives for a really long time, but truth is very important to God because it is what sets us free. John 4, we're taught there that God seeks worshipers. In fact, the wording is we must worship God in spirit and in truth. Is it possible that I might have some error, some wrongness in the way I may be viewing and reviewing the moments in my life that caused me stress or anxiety? Could it be that that primitive brain, that elephant, took over for a while? And my rational mind took a back seat? And maybe that's what I remember? And not the real thing that happened? Could I benefit from intentionally venturing with God into those dark corners of my heart? Since He's there already, He knows the secrets of every heart. There's no surprises to Him. Every heart has dark places, and God wants to know them all. He wants us to know them. He knows them all. He wants us to know them all. He wants to shine His light of healing, love, and peace into every dark place. But fear keeps our pain hidden, and therefore incomplete. And we are not our best version of ourselves. John 3 says, this is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. You know, this word evil here, and I am not a Greek scholar, okay? I am the one abnormally born among the teachers. But the word for evil here, okay, has a sense of being touched by Satan, the deceiver. The definition is not so much, you're a corrupt person and you intentionally went off and committed a sin. It has more the sense of being afflicted, right? People love darkness because they're afflicted. People love darkness because they're full of labors, annoyances, hardships. People love darkness and they hide from the light of truth because they live in a time full of peril to the Christian faith and steadfastness. People love darkness instead of light because there's been a lot of pain and trouble. They've had a bad start. Maybe they have a disease. They're blind. They just can't see. And yes, maybe there's some real sin there. But there's a lot more going on in an afflicted soul than just you're in sin and you need to repent. Truth is really important to dig out, and it is not always immediately apparent. Another step on the path is our lament, and I put together confession here because I really believe this was God's intent with confession. It's our lament, trying to get us to be in touch and lament on a regular basis. I really believe God has created us in such a way that we must give voice to the emotional truth inside of us, right? I always knew God's word is really valuable and really powerful and really important, but I confess I really undervalued the power of our words, which makes no sense because I do know, I would say the worst pain in the world is not physical pain. It's the pain from terrible things that are said to you or terrible things you hear in your head. Right? Our words carry incredible power to destroy and to heal. And I absolutely undervalued that when it came to our words. God's word I completely trust. But lament and confession, Jesus himself gave voice to the pain in his heart. He never sinned, obviously, but he had pain in his heart. He gave voice to that pain, saying, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. I mean, we're kind of used to hearing that language in English out of our Bibles, but what would he say today in our vernacular? What would that sound like today? He hit the wall. It was the dark night of the soul for sure for him. He also said, he lamented, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. Right? How I long to gather you together. He lamented. He gave voice. He also cried in public, by the way. Psalm 62, I think, is a beautiful example of God's healing, connecting to God's healing in lament, where it says, truly my soul finds rest in God. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. And as Roberta really clearly said in the beginning, when Hannah did this, when she poured her heart out to God, nothing had changed, but she felt better already, right? And I will just like to say, this is a huge part of the path, but this is not the end of the path. This is not the end of the path. I don't know if I've known a lot of people who are able to lament, who will, actually I had a friend who, you meet this person and in the first 60 seconds of making their acquaintance, they would have told you the greatest trauma in their life over and 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 over again. It's possible to be very vulnerable and very verbal and very expressive and be very stuck. So just the ability to lament is not healing. It's an essential step, but you're not done yet. You're not done yet. The end of it all is forgiveness. And I will say that I've been very surprised, and I shouldn't be. I've already confessed I'm surprised by a lot of stuff I shouldn't have been surprised by, right? Here's another one. I didn't understand, and a lot of us don't understand forgiveness very well. And I'm sure I would have said, 10 years ago, no, I get it. I'm good. But I really didn't get it. Forgiveness is an intentional decision. We probably all get that, right? It's like stepping on the path. But I do think it's very easy to get sidetracked and think, yeah, but I'm not ready. I'm not ready. Why aren't you ready to take the step? Are your legs broken? No, your legs are fine. Take the step. No, but I don't feel it yet. Actually, forgiveness has nothing to do with feelings. Absolutely nothing to do with feelings. It is an intentional step. You take the step. In grief recovery, they say, how could you possibly expect to feel something that you have not yet done? You must first step. And it's the action of stepping and giving voice that changes over time, not a switch. There's no switch. It's a path. And over time, as you walk this path, and if you've ever, seen a path formed in a field where there was no people walking, and then suddenly people start to walk, it takes a while to see the path form. You have to walk it a few times, but then you see the path, right? Forgiveness takes a while sometimes to really feel it. But we should not mistake forgiveness for the feeling. It's the action. Forgiveness is a choice. Forgiveness is letting go of resentment. Forgiveness has nothing to do with letting the other person off the hook. Forgiveness has nothing to do with reconciliation. It has nothing to do with as long as they don't get it, I can't forgive them. That is so not the way to approach it. I have to take the step on the path anyway. They may never get it. They may be dead. They may be dead spiritually. They may never catch up. But I have to let go of the resentment in my heart. Let's say you have an abuser, a real traumatic abuser in your life all the time, every day, continually abusing you. You still have to let go of the resentment you hold in your heart. It doesn't mean you have to be friends with them. It doesn't mean you have to spend time with them. It doesn't mean that you don't bring them to justice. But you have to let go of the resentment in your heart. That is forgiveness. And it often has to be practiced repeatedly. And I think this is why we have that beautiful conversation in the Gospels between Peter and Jesus. You know the one I'm talking about, Matthew 18. Lord, this brother, 7 times today, 7 times today he sinned against me. 7 times today he wants me to forgive him. What do I do with this? And what does Jesus say? 7 times. And 7 times. And 7 times. Peter, keep going. Step on the path. Step on the path. 7 times, step on the path. Keep going. But it's really hard. Step on the path. That's forgiveness. In grief recovery, I love their little original phrasing. For them, giving up hope of a different or better yesterday is forgiveness, which I found really helpful in addition to all the gospel teaching, just because there was so much I felt guilty about in the past. And it was very freeing to think about, you know what? I just need to forgive all of that. I need to give up the hope that I could have been different then. I wasn't. And I need to give up the hope that anybody else could have been different then. Doesn't mean we don't try to fix everything, right? It's not letting everybody off the hook, but it's giving up the pain and the resentment. It's letting go of the resentment, right? That helped me a ton. Forgiveness has got to be given voice to. You can't just do it in your head. Why? I don't know. Our words are so important. Researchers have shown that when you name an emotion, when you speak, something happens. Somebody who's studied all this, you can come and explain this. I don't know why. All I know is it works. We need to give voice to what's going on in our hearts for it to be real. And now, not necessarily to the person, because they may not be safe, but somewhere to God, out loud to God. He can take anything. He can take anything. You know, I think about Jesus on the cross, perfect example of this, right? In Luke 23:34, what happens when he pronounces, Lord, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing? What was going on? He had nails in his hands, he had nails in his feet, he was suffocating, his back was torn up, he was dying. His situation was not improving. No one in the crowd was saying, you know, okay, the thief on the cross, yes. But at this point, no. There was no one that he heard that was in communication with him, acknowledging, apologizing. He just freely set his foot on the path and forgave. Did he feel better after that? No, he died. It got worse. And that happens sometimes. But he is our example. He who had no sin, he said, God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I often think this is maybe why in Luke 5 it says that he often withdrew to lonely places. How many times did he have to forgive Judas? Knowing Judas was a betrayer. Maybe all those times in the wilderness, God, please help me. I forgive him. I do forgive him. I do. I don't know. I don't know what he said, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if that was a part of it. We have no choice but to keep walking the path. And you know, I absolutely love this path in Isaiah where it says, although the Lord gives you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, and actually before, if you have a chance to read this is Isaiah 30. It's incredible. Even before this, it's incredible. He says, you know, your teachers will be hidden no more. With your own eyes, you'll see them. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your eyes will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. This is the way. We just need to walk in it. May we find our path. May we connect to God's healing. God bless you.
Thank you both very much. That was wonderful. I love that sentence at the end there. We are out of time. So, one question.
Just the one question, then we better get for lunch. I better be quick. Thanks so much, Roberta. Thanks, Tammy, for your honest look at grief. I really was impressed by your case for what you said, Tammy. I'm potentially convinced for myself. I love the way you sold yourself, knowing scriptures, being able to say you're fine and looking fine, and being able to seem spiritual. I may be potentially convinced of a lot of grief in my past, but the reason I say potentially convinced, what I'm interested in here is observable signs for you and for others around you. In that, for me, I am quick to lament. I tell everybody about myself straight away. I actually value my past and that I'm strong now because of my trauma. And I actually have celebrated it from that point of view. But there is so much there, so much that I don't even understand. So what I am interested in is, are there for you? And when you said this will happen, then you had a wall. So what I was interested in was the this will happen part. Were there any observable signs for you? You might have mentioned them, and then observable signs from those around you to indicate that maybe there was something more you needed to look into.
I probably, I missed them all. Yeah, I'm sure there were. I actually think there was, when we got to London in 1989, so my mom had only been dead a year and a half, and I think God was trying to use a group of women in my life then to say to me, gee, when you talk about your mom, it sounds like it happened to somebody else. But like you, I would have said the same thing you did. I celebrate. This has changed me, made me a better person. How could you possibly be critical about how I dealt with my, I was super offended at that point. They probably were right. And I kind of think now God was trying to open my eyes, but neither they nor I had the right tools to set me on this path, right? They were digging, and I was defending, and that's kind of where it stopped, because we didn't have any further tools. So there was one. I'm sure there were more. I don't know if that helps. But.
Great question. So that we don't hit the wall for lunch, it's time for lunch. We'll meet back here at 2 p.m. There'll be a song. The idea is to actually be in the room for the song rather than using the song as a call to come into the room. So enjoy your lunch.